Good morning and welcome to a special 1-hour broadcast of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Thursday, January 6, 2022, exactly 1 year since the insurrection and riot at the U.S. Capitol that followed false claims by former President Donald Trump that the 2020 election was wrought with fraud and stolen from him. The deadly riot that involved Trump supporters and white supremacists has led to further mistrust of the U.S. government, with a brand new poll that has revealed that 34% of Americans think violent action against the government is sometimes justified. The survey conducted between December 17th and 19th revealed stark partisan splits on the question. 40% of Republicans and 41% of independents said violence against government is sometimes justified, compared to 23% of Democrats. In a separate poll released, 62% of Americans said they expect violence over losing in future presidential elections. 38% said they expect the losing side will concede peacefully. At least a quarter of Americans said force might be justified depending on the situation regarding issues like civil rights, gun policies, election results, and labor. We discussed all of that and so much more this morning on Let It Be Known with James Washington of the Atlanta Voice and Dallas Weekly, Burke Wire and political reporter extraordinaire Lauren Burke, Washington Informer reporter James Wright, publisher James Washington, as I said, of the Atlanta Voice and Dallas Weekly, Andria Carter of the Cincinnati Herald, Insight News publisher Al McFarlane, Robin Massengill of the D.C. Office of the Attorney General, and Let It Be Known's chief legal analyst from the Tarver Law Firm in Toms River, New Jersey, Robert Tarver. But let's first get a perspective on the mindset that many have that something could justify violence against the government. Let's first check out this clip. Okay, no clip. Oh, there's the clip.
I'm not from here.
Start making a list, put all those names down, and we start hunting them down one by one.
Why did you want to go in?
We're storming the Capitol. It's a revolution.
Dr. Wilborn, I'm going to start with you. There's this mentality. I mean, you saw them. They want to storm the Capitol. She says, we're storming the Capitol. The mentality, even of that poll we started with, people think that it's okay. There are many who think it's okay to, violently attack the government. Well, I think you're on mute, Dr. Wilborn.
Good morning, everybody. I think it's interesting to think about the mentality of those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th of last year, because, of course, there's been a lot of talk about, these people are, is it mental health? Is it mental illness? What is going on with these folks? And one of the things that I think is important to understand about behavior is that behavior is multi-determined, is multi-causal, right? And so, is it reasonable to think that some of those folks out there who believe that it's okay to institute violence against the government and to destroy government property, is it fair to think that mental unwellness is a part of the mindset that led them to do that? Yeah, sure, it is fair to think that. But I think it's also fair to think that there's other things that are at play that's contributing to why folks were out there that day. Factors that stem from, this sense of entitlement, or this sense of loss of control, or loss of power, or a sense of supremacy, or a sense of privilege that they actually have the right to be out there. And so I think when we're thinking about why it is that people were making the choice to violate the laws of the land as an opportunity to assert their right to be out there, I think we need to see this as multi-determined and multifaceted.
Yeah, and James Washington, I think James has joined us. James, Dr. Wilborn is America's #1 mental health and wellness expert and board certified professional counselor. Now that's her take, but I know you and I spoke on the phone the other day about this. James, I want you to talk about your perspective on this insurrection and that whole mentality of being able to take over a government.
I'm not sure you want me on this panel, because when all is said and done, welcome to America. Whatever people have thought or believed, or the time has eroded, if you will, if you look at the root of where this country and how this country was formed, it was formed based on revolution. If you look at the quote, go back to the Civil War, and it evolved, as you will, out of revolution, out of Civil War. And some of the things that we're looking at right now were never, ever removed. And as such, the mentality that I have about it is, now that you realize how really fragile democracy is on paper, and how we see how really fragile it is in the streets, people are starting to wake up to it. And if you don't hit it head on with the candid nature of, this is sometimes who people are, everything that the doctor just said contributes to that. Lack of power, lack of this, but it also goes back to a sense that we never see or had not seen before, which is those in power stay in power and have a mentality, if you will, that this is the way things should be. Now, when that actually at its root cause starts to change, some of that has to do with political dynamics, some of that has to do with the browning of America, if you will. But the reality, and I'll leave it with this: how many of us on this panel saw Black people cry when Barack Obama was elected president? What do you think was happening in white households?
Well, insights from James Washington. Al, I know you mentioned earlier too that there were some things going on in Minneapolis. Al McFarlane, the publisher of Insight News, out in Minneapolis with the Capitol buildings being protected today. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that we are at a day of reckoning in the country and in the world. I think that change is afoot at a pace and at a depth and breadth that is unparalleled, unseen before, but also unstoppable. One of my colleagues here always talks about looking at when the George Wallaces of the world declare segregation now and forever. It's a sign that segregation is about to disappear, to fall away. I think we're at that kind of critical moment again, where the people who stormed the Capitol last year were symbolically reenacting George Wallace's last stand I think it was George Wallace in Alabama, and that foretells massive, major shift in the society, in the country, and that comes out of the reckoning. That's what I'm calling it. We're reading it now, where the country, the world have to come face to face with the reality of the illegitimate use of power and the suppression of an entire people, not only here in this country, but through systems like it around the world. I think we're at a Kairos moment, and I think our job as communicators is to tell that story, to ring the bell, and to help usher it forward.
Yeah, and Dr. Wilborn, again, we see in the video clips that we've been able to show so thus far this morning, we see the mindset was things didn't go their way. They didn't want to accept that. They decided to take matters into their own hands, and at the same and understanding what Jim Washington was saying. So it's not just these individuals, but America as a whole has a mindset that maybe needs to be looked into from a professional standpoint.
Well, it's interesting, this use of the term power. And if you all will just bear with me a quick second, I hope I will get to a place in this that makes a bit of sense. So one of my favorite professors, somebody who I respected dearly in my doctoral program at UNC Charlotte, Dr. Peggy Ceballos, said, we were all born babies. We all started out as babies. And that might not sound profound to many people, but to me, that was a very profound statement, because in that statement, what she was suggesting is that we all start our race, the race of our life the same as babies, right? We all start with a sort of clean slate. And what happens to us between birth and later adulthood is a mixture of biology, psychology, socialization, environment, so on and so forth. And so when we think about the behaviors that, again, many of these people engage in, one of the things that comes up for me is they are trying to assert power. But for me, what it shows is that they feel disempowered. Because people who truly feel empowered, people who truly have a sense of self-worth, self-love, self-governance, do not have a need to assert power over others, right? Because they're too busy sort of walking in and reaping the benefits and the harvest of their own self-empowerment. They also are individuals who practice self-love, right? The Bible talks about love thy neighbor as you love yourself, essentially. And if what happened on January 6th is any indication of love and power, I would say that the folks out there hate themselves more than they hate us, although they assert it on us. And what their demonstration of power was really a demonstration of disempowerment, right? And I think that is part of the mindset shift that we really need to make when we're thinking about the mentality of these folks. We talk a lot about supremacy. Is it supremacy? Or is it really inferiority on display? I think we have to change the narrative to really get underneath what's really going on with the folks that are acting in ways that look like supremacy, but are really in reality inferiority.
Yeah, and James, I'll let you respond to that before we get into the political side of this.
Oh, the doc is right on point. Al is right on point, etc. I just like to put another word in there, if you will, maybe two. One is control, and the other one is fear. All right, we don't really address the issue of fear on the other side, if you will. Our communities have had to adjust forever in terms of life in this country, and we've done a hell of a job of adjusting to all of the things that would be put upon us and have been put upon us. Okay. Now I think we need to at least address a fear factor of what someone would think if that all changed. We, and most of the people in the street, are not those people in power positions, but they feel empowered by those people who are in those positions. And now what you're looking at is what happens if those folks are not empowered. Does that mean I lose control? The only thing I'll say is that now we have reasons to rationalize it. All right, they can rationalize it with the big lie, which is the election was quote stolen. Now, if something is stolen from me, then I can react a little bit differently than, hey, I lost the game. All right, so all of those things are factors now, but they're not factors that began today. That was my only point in what I said earlier. Everything the doc said, everything that Al has said previously, all I'm saying is if you roll back the clock, when was it ever gone? That's why I said welcome to America, because we are now, Al said reckoning. I'm saying, well, and I blame Barack Obama for everything. I really do. And what I mean by that is he took the rock of America and turned it over. And we saw the worms and the dirt and all this kind of stuff. And what did he turn over? People were actually on television saying, I just cannot vote for that black man. Didn't matter what his qualifications were. Didn't matter if he was the best man for the job. They were forced to say publicly, I just can't do that. And now what you have with the world changing, as Al said, and the reckoning coming, the issue becomes one for me sometimes just add control or lack of it and add fear, because that is a reality of why people do certain things.
Well, don't go anywhere, guys. I know Al's going to have to leave us, but we're going to segue over to the political side of this. We're going to bring in political reporter extraordinaire Lauren Burke, James Wright of the Washington Informer, and Andria Carter, Herald, and also the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr. Dr. Chavis, Lauren, James, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And I won't take long. I just want to thank all of our participants. This is a record-breaking show because we are breaking news, we're breaking perspective, we're breaking insight. And I would just like to say one thing. I want to thank Dr. Wilborn. I agree with her. First of all, she went to the right school, University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And I had a mathematics teacher at that same school. And the mathematics teacher taught me that we have to look at the exponent. We have to look at the exponential reality that African Americans face. It's just not what happened on January the 6th.
Right.
It's what happened in 1776, what happened in 1600. It's what happened in 1500s when the transatlantic slave trade was on for 100 years before it even got to the United States, what's known as the United States. So we're talking about centuries of oppression, centuries of white supremacy, centuries. And I agree, electing the first Black president gingered up all of these centuries old revelations. But Dr. Wilborn is right. But nobody's born with prejudice. Nobody's born with hate. Nobody's really born with fear. Now, there's some post-traumatic syndrome that may be brought on through genetically from one generation to another. But what happened was Donald Trump, Jim Watson's a marketer. Donald Trump is a master marketer. He marketed his campaign to play into the white supremacy. He knew he couldn't win the election. He was talking about the election was rigged 8 months before the election. So this is not a new narrative.
Yeah.
And it shows about the gullibility, the ignorance. You have to understand, don't make racism something sophisticated. It is the complexity of exponential ignorance. And it has to be unpacked. And it's just not for Black people to do the unpacking. White people need to go to the confession booth. They need to get on their knees, and pray to the one God we say we all, that created us all as babies. We've got some institutionalized problems that these people have built. We've got some legislative problems. We've got some emotional problems. I'm talking about, when I say we, I'm talking about this nation. The whole world is watching. This is January the 6th. Last year was a dress rehearsal of what is still planned to come.
And so with that, Dr. Chavis, Lauren, James, let me ask this question here. The attack on the Capitol has changed so many in various ways, but it seems to have only strengthened the resolve of some Republicans who support the president and citizens who believe, the former president who supports the former president, and citizens who believe attacking the government is sometimes justified. Lauren, I'm going to start with you. Why is this so?
Because the opposition hasn't woken up yet for some reason, which is really scary to watch. And I think that kind of was noted by the fact that Merrick Garland is standing there as the Attorney General of the United States. If you remember, Javier Becerra was being considered for that position, as was Andrew Cuomo. Certainly in the case of Andrew Cuomo, you would have had a stronger personality in that role, which would have met the moment in history that we're at right now. I know that in a few hours, the Attorney General Garland has a speech at the U.S. Capitol. Judging on what we've already heard and already seen and the slowness of his prosecutions, that indicates that he is not the man for the moment, at least not so far. That has been, I think, punctuated by the fact that Joe Biden is, to this point, not meeting this moment as well. I just took a look at some of the excerpts of the speech he's to make today at the U.S. Capitol. And I just think that there's not the urgency that we should be seeing when we're talking openly about a cold civil war or a second civil war or some sort of end of democracy. I mean, the fact that these people could arrive at the nation's capital and burn a Black Lives Matter flag outside of Metropolitan AME Baptist Church, Metropolitan AME Church, blocks from the White House, and there's no big reaction to any of this other than the people at the church. That's a problem. It kind of reminded me to lead up to Charlottesville in 2017, where we saw a bunch of white supremacists march through the University of Virginia with torches, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And the governor at the time, Terry McAuliffe, the mayor of Charlottesville, Mike Signer, all fell asleep. I mean, they fell asleep. There was no urgency. These people they're not dropping out of the sky from nowhere. They warn you. They warn you as to what they're going to do. All of the stuff that was on the internet prior to the Charlottesville race fight that we had with all these racists that showed up in Charlottesville, that was all on the internet. The other thing that has to be discussed politically is Facebook. The reason that we're having this type of situation is that people have been they've been affected by misinformation and disinformation. Period. I mean, everybody knows. Dr. Chavis said it, and we'll say it again. You know, the election. Donald Trump lost by close to 3 million votes the first time he ran. Then he got beat by 7 million votes the second time he ran. He's obviously lying, but his lies are amplified by social media that's completely unregulated, and they don't care about anything other than making money. Somebody has to confront that, and that somebody has got to be members of the Democratic Party, because I don't see anybody else on the Republican side trying to confront that. So the problem we have now politically is one party that is putting us to the precipice of ending of our democracy and staring us right in the face as they do it, and the other party not acting strong enough to stop them.
Yeah, and the president's speech is scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern time this morning. He's expected to talk about the former president's role in the insurrection. You're watching live a 1-hour special of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. James, James, another poll found that 60% of Americans feel Trump bears a great deal or good amount of responsibility for his role in the attack. We know the January 6th Commission is doing its due diligence, but does anyone really expect the former president to be held criminally accountable?
Well, I don't think that a lot of people expect for President Trump to be held criminally accountable, because I don't know, and I have to agree with Lauren on this, I don't know whether the DOJ is going to go that far. And that's really a shame, because public officials should be held.
I think we lost James.
Back
there. Okay. Well, I'll segue over to you, Andria Carter of the Cincinnati Herald. Is there any expectation that the former president will be held accountable?
I think there is an expectation that he will be held accountable, but whether or not will he be prosecuted for it, I don't think so. I think the prosecution of Donald Trump is going to come through all the other investigation and court cases that are coming up. I think he'll be prosecuted faster that way, based on his businesses, than politically. Because the Republicans, even though quietly behind the scenes, they're saying, oh my God, we don't want him to talk. We don't want him to do this and that. They're not willing publicly to come out and speak up to what is wrong. And that's cowardice. And we have cowards in legislature right now who are not willing to speak up. And I think they have not really truly embraced the fact that we're on a fence. We could go this way or go that way. And until they get up off the fence and choose a side, I mean, publicly speaking out, choosing a side, we're going to keep having the same situation. We're going to keep having the lie perpetuated. And people are just going to believe what they believe. Based on that, also, we have an underlying anger in the country. People are angry because Donald Trump didn't win. People are angry because they quote, feel being forced to get vaccinated. People are angry because we have not made more progress within the Black community. Our Black leaders are being subjugated to anger and oppression and these little small side campaigns to put them down. All this is going on, and no one is speaking up to say, stop. This is what's going on. They're eroding our democracy because they fear the unknown, because Barack Obama, when he was elected, shook the core of the America to its roots, and they don't know how to deal with it. So we're suffering from PTSD politically, and we don't know how to deal with it.
Well, Stacey, can you hear me?
We can hear you, James, but one other question before we have some lawyers that we're going to bring on as well before we get into the legality. But I wanted to go back to Lauren Burke on this, and James, you can chime in as well. But let me go to Lauren first. Lauren, remember too, of course, the attack was not just on the U.S. Capitol, but on democracy as a whole. And we saw state capitals in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and other places come under threat, including individuals who brought firearms and other weapons to Capitol buildings after buying into Trump's big lie. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's life was clearly in danger as a plot tied to the insurrection was uncovered, in which the perps planned to kidnap and perhaps even kill her. Can we discuss that aspect, Lauren?
Well, yeah. I mean, the fact that we're even having an open discussion about the governor of Michigan possibly being kidnapped, and by the way, the governor of Virginia, the same group that threatened the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, is in itself a call to arms, one would think, for the Department of Justice and the FBI. You're not seeing that level of urgency from them so far. You know, you have two sets of prosecutors. I can't wait to hear from the attorneys that could potentially be moving on the bigger question of the issue of sedition in this country. One is in New York, Tish James, and the other is at the Justice Department, at Main Justice. So I'm not clear on what has to happen or what we need to see for people to get motivated. But if this isn't motivating you, if an attack on the Capitol, a violent attack on the Capitol isn't motivating you, I don't know what is. It's been strange to watch, quite frankly. Merrick Garland is moving way too slow, not too slow, way too slow. And when I refer to that, I'm not referring to people who just broke into the Capitol. I'm referring to the big players in this that we heard right before the attack, starting with the former president of the United States. And I would expect a prosecution. We sure as hell see prosecutions being made on everything else. We got people sitting in jail, you know, for a bag of weed for life in prison in Louisiana. Tish James had no problem trying to prosecute Andrew Cuomo. That happened quickly, and that was dropped completely on Monday. So, I mean, this idea that they can't be prosecuted, to me, is completely unacceptable.
Yeah, and James, your thoughts?
Yeah, Stacey, you know, people need to remember this, what happened on January the 6th, 2021. But remember what happened on January the 5th, 2021. You had a black man win a U.S. Senate seat from the state of Georgia, and a Jewish man win a Senate seat from the state of Georgia that flipped it over to the Democrats. And good grief, 3 months earlier, a black woman, a woman of color, was elected vice president of the United States. So some of these good old boys are saying, what is going on here? I'm losing control. I'm not in charge as much as I used to be. So this is what is fueling just what Dr. Wilborn was saying. This insecurity and this inferiority complex, which is what it really is fueling this type of nonsense.
Oh, we knew that back when the Tea Party started, back when Barack Obama, Dr. Chavis, of course, touched on this. I mean, we saw what happened. They effectively created their own media, and they created their own reality. Andrew Breitbart created his own media. They saw a black man in charge for 8 years. And then all of a sudden, we've realized now to this day that they are willing to crash the entire system rather than allow people of color in charge of anything. That scares them that much, they crash the whole system. And that's why watching this race that we just had in Virginia is interesting, because effectively what Glenn Youngkin did was he took the extremeness out of the party and took Trump out of the conversation, and he won. Mm-hmm. But the Republican Party is still not interested in moderating enough to get more people under their tent. They would rather end democracy. The Trump Republicans would rather end democracy than share it with anybody else, and particularly with anybody black.
Well, you know, a lot of, you mentioned the prosecutions and what's been going on with the prosecutions. There's also lawsuits going on as well. Let's bring in our attorneys. Let it be known, Chief Legal Analyst Robert Tarver, and from the D.C. Attorney General's office, who's speaking in her own capacity, Robin Massengill. Good morning, attorneys.
Good morning.
How are you, Attorney Massengill?
I'm fine. I'm actually a lawyer. I'm not an attorney, but go ahead.
Okay. Well,
I just like to be clear about everything.
Yes, indeed. So there are lawsuits going on. following this horrific attack on the U.S. Capitol last year, from a legal standpoint, and I'll start with you, Attorney Tarver. What can we expect from these? There's civil lawsuits, and of course, we talked a little bit about the criminal aspect of it, or the potential criminal aspect of it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, let me follow up with the criminal aspect that Lauren brought up, because I think it's really, really significant. Tish James does not have the jurisdiction to be able to bring criminal charges against Donald Trump. She is an attorney general of a state. But the person who does have jurisdiction is Merrick Garland as the attorney general of the United States. And everyone, not everyone, but many people have been very critical of him, because it's not that we don't necessarily hear that something is happening, because the fact of the matter is you don't often hear that an investigation is going on, and the integrity of the investigation demands many times that you are quiet. But we don't even see any of the movement. In other words, for most investigations of this sort that would require the resources to be able to prosecute the president of the United States or his progeny, you would be seeing the issuance of subpoenas. Then you would be seeing the convening of a grand jury. All those things take significant time. And the fact that we don't even see the beginning stages of those things is troubling. Now, Merrick Garland got on the news yesterday and said he's willing to hold people accountable at any level, which means a number of different things to a number of different people. Many people saw that as a sign that he's willing to say at any level, meaning the president of the United States. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. There's no commit. He hasn't committed to anything, which I wouldn't expect that he would. So it's very, very difficult from a criminal perspective to know that he is the only one that has the power to do that. Who I do think has done very well and maybe laying the groundwork for him is the United States Congress in their hearings. They have compiled information, and they are making it easy for the Department of Justice to bring a case in this matter. But there's no telling that that's what the Department of Justice is going to do.
Yeah, and Robin, let me start by saying you just taught me something. I did not know that there was a difference between an attorney and a lawyer. But, you know, Robin, there is more than 700 people have been charged by the Justice Department in connection with the Capitol riot. Offenses ranging from illegally entering the building to assaulting officers and members of the media. But I know that you have some insight as far as on the civil side, right?
Correct. To the extent that Carl Racine has finds it extremely important to have the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, who are the main groups associated with the January 6th uprising, because I consider it an uprising or an attempted coup, which is what it was. And then 31 individual plaintiffs who he's saying conspired to basically stop the peaceful transfer of power, which is ahistorical in this country. I mean, we now know that there is no more proof that there's a peaceful transfer, which is the hallmark of democracy in this country or in any democracy. And I think that Racine finds that the way that you kind of squash this kind of potential uprising, and you have to squash it at the root, is that you bankrupt these organizations and the individuals associated with it, so that January 6th does not become the premise of what could happen in 2022 and 2024.
Yeah, I want to bring back Lauren Burke and James Washington if possible, because I know they both had some great questions. Lauren, I know you had some questions when it comes to the legal side.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe this blends legal and political, but I wanted to ask Attorney Tarver about the fact that Tish James is, of course, investigating the Trump organization, their financial practices. She just, threw down two subpoenas on Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. Yeah, I get it. The two things are not the same, the attack on the Capitol and the investigation on the finances of the Trump organization. But once again, we see people get prosecuted for things all the time, and those prosecutions are quite frequently connected. And there's quite frequently arguments being made by prosecutors that those things are connected. Obviously, Benny Thompson's committee is looking into the financial links between the attack on the Capitol and those who were funding the people who showed up in Washington, D.C. 1 year ago today. So I'm just asking Attorney Tarver, don't you think that there could obviously be a link in those two investigations between Tish James and what the feds end up doing if they do anything?
Absolutely, absolutely. And quite frankly, I'm looking at the possibility of RICO prosecutions, which is racketeering type prosecution that this that the offices could in some way bring. The good thing is that for most of these prosecutions, you will get agencies who cooperate. So you get state agencies who provide information to federal agencies. I know in New York that does happen between the state attorney general's office and the U.S. attorney's office. It has happened in the past in matters that I practiced in federal court in New York. But there's one thing that we haven't talked about here, and that is there is a corrective nature of the law that's been corrupted here. And you see it over and over again. It's happened over the years, corruptive forces at each sequential step. So it starts with people not abiding by subpoenas. Subpoenas are the bedrock of accountability. If you cannot be compelled to come in, if you will not obey process, if you won't listen to a subpoena, then no one can hold anyone accountable. And time again, these people completely turn their back, thumb their nose at the subpoena process. And we haven't done everything that we can do as a society to say, enough is enough. And that's how we get to the corrosive and corruptive nature of what's going on here. That's why I say that Merrick Garland, even in the movement of subpoenas, they were slow with Mr. Bannon, and they need to make some decisions about Mr. Meadows as well. But they need to take action. Sometimes, as you discussed earlier, the perception of justice is as important as justice itself. And I don't even like to use justice anymore. Let's put it this way. The perception of accountability is as important as accountability itself.
And maybe this question, I was going to throw it to James. I'm going to throw it to you in a moment, James. But, you talk about the legal aspects and the criminality of all of this. But remember this, too. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who was sprayed with a chemical substance during the riot, collapsed later and died from 2 strokes on January 7th. The D.C. medical examiner said it was 2 strokes that ultimately killed him. In the days and months after the attack, 4 more police officers who responded to the Capitol that day died by suicide. And even FBI Director Christopher Wray, at the time, he called it an act of domestic terrorism. Again, for the attorneys and lawyer, why aren't we yet seeing anybody even talk about sedition here?
I think that they're afraid to touch it. I mean, they're afraid to touch that issue. I think that, unfortunately, white people are afraid to see white people as they truly are. They're afraid to see the country toppling at the level that it is. But it's been a slow march by the Republican Party since, Paul Weyrich wrote his manual, a very short manual, and about what the Republican Party is and what they will do and how they will seize power in the country. That I don't think that white people actually believe that they're capable of this level of corruption, this level of lies, all to gain power. But it's been a slow march since Nixon, essentially, to take over the country by the Republican Party. And people are afraid to approach that.
The other thing is you've got a group of institutionalists in Merrick Garland and a number of U.S. attorneys, people who say, let's go through the process. And they're afraid in a number of ways to bring these types of things against high-level people, not recognizing that we are at an unprecedented time. And I like to say this, it always depends in taking action on whose ox is being gored. How much does Merrick Garland have to lose from this type of insurrection, as opposed to what people
Attorney
that
Tarver,
look like you and I have to lose?
Attorney Tarver, let me stop you there, because if we're saying that these folks that are charged with doing these jobs are afraid to do the jobs, they shouldn't be in the jobs. I know James Washington is there, and he's thinking, he's a deep thinker. So I want to hear from James on this as well, and let him question our legal minds over here. Is James on mute? You're on mute, James. We can't hear you, James Washington.
You can hear me now.
Now we can hear you.
Okay. And first, I said I'm not. Don't put me in a position where I am at odds with anybody on here, particularly the legal minds on here. I respect everybody for the right reasons. All I'm simply saying is to go back to what everybody has said, and you need a 2-hour show for this, by the way. I'm going to put this forward in the sense of trying to answer why folks aren't doing anything. I'm going to put this into the wink and the nod. And the wink and the nod is, after the Civil War, you know, a lot of things should have happened that didn't because there was a wink and a nod. The war is over. So, okay, let's just let you guys alone. That's where Jim Crow comes from. That's where lynching comes from. That's where all of these kind of things, because the parties in play at the point in time just wanted that to go away. So we've been living in a wink and a nod situation for a long time. And that wink and nod situation, I think LBJ said it. You know, he said Republicans have figured out how to tell poor white folk that they are operating in their best interest, which he knew and we knew and we all know was not necessarily the case. So that was the wink and the nod in the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was complicit in it. So this complicity is what we're talking about right now, because we're at the brink. Our community has always known this. Some of this stuff is not surprising to us, but some of it is also in the incredulous nature of why aren't people doing anything about it? Because the reality that we're at the precipice, the reality that democracy is on the line. So when you say somebody is an institutionalist, and I understand that, then that person is saying, I don't know what to do.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't have a clue about this, because there's no broad party over here that is simply saying, here's how you respond to that. So you've got these little firefights. It's easy to prosecute Donald Trump on his corporation. That has nothing to do with democracy. That's a way that maybe we can kind of shush him, make him go away, and these kinds of things. All I'm simply saying is that complicity is now what we're looking at. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not complicit right now, you're on this panel. You're talking about democracy at stake. You're talking about the system being attacked. You're talking about, I forgot who said it on the panel, that said they would rather let it go up in flames, because they believe when that clears, we'll be able to build it back without some of the what do you call it, the restraints of what the policies say, the restraints of all men are created equal, the restraints of what the Constitution was about. And I believe that therein lies some of the answers to why aren't they really doing anything? All right. If I'm an institutionalist, then I want to go through the process, because the process works until you see January 6th.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we know that. We see that. And we're saying this should, by process, be easy to prosecute. They're giving you everything. But you know, who's going to step out first? Is it going to be the Attorney General? Is it going to be Joe Biden? Is it going to be those same guys who were looking at a wink and a nod and being complicit are now saying, what do we do now? Because if they don't do something, January 6th is going to happen, the young lady said, 2022, 2024. Because it's not going away. It's been here forever.
Well, and you know, along with that, Lauren, we talked about the five officers who lost their lives in the aftermath. But the most common crime alleged so far, and here we are a year later, and which carries a maximum, the most common crime carries a maximum sentence of 1 year in prison and $100,000 fine. And that is basically remaining in the restricted capital grounds. And there's been misdemeanor charges here and there. I mean, more than 700 people have been charged, or more than 700 charges have been filed, I should say, low-level counts of illegal picketing, disorderly and disruptive conduct on the Capitol grounds. But they say they continue to build more serious cases. Are you seeing that, Lauren? You're on the top of everything over there. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, they're building the cases. I mean, obviously, the laws were not designed for a 1812 style attack on the U.S. Capitol, so they didn't have specific things that would have made it pretty punitive had they had something in place. I'm actually surprised that Congress has not passed some laws that do just that. Not sure why they're waiting for that. Full disclosure, I've been dating a U.S. Capitol police officer for a while. He's one of my best friends. He was there on the day of the attack on the Senate side of the Capitol. And yes, he did engage in hand-to-hand combat. And, shout out to Eugene Goodman, another friend of mine. These guys went through something that I think their leadership greatly failed them on in terms of, we saw a tweet. I don't know, Stacey, if you saw it last night. Stephen Sund, who's the former member of the former chief of police for the U.S. Capitol, tweeted last night that he's going to drop some information because everybody's lying, and I'm going to come in and tell the truth. But we all know what happened. they did not take the threat of white folks coming to the Capitol seriously. You know, I was there for the Million Man March 1 and 2. I've been there for immigration rallies, for healthcare rallies. I saw all the cops in riot gear, including my boyfriend, for a Million Man March anniversary 2, circling the Capitol. Obviously, the reception was completely different. And to quote Joe Scarborough on NBC, if these people had been black, they would have been shot in the face. We all know that. We all implicitly know that. I actually think that, institutionalist or not, Tish James at this point should know what time it is. Joe Biden should know what time it is. You don't pick somebody like Merrick Garland as your attorney general when you know that you have people out there like Doug Jones who would come in here and understand exactly what time it was from a historic standpoint and from a current event standpoint. You just don't do that. Biden made a huge mistake in who he selected as the attorney general of the United States. And Barack Obama made a huge mistake trying to have him nominated for the Supreme Court. We knew then that Merrick Garland was a moderate. So I'm not sure what the big surprise is. But anyway, to get back to your question, Stacey, no, the laws are not enough right now with regard to U.S. Capitol. They obviously have to change a lot of things. We know the margins are close. 4-vote margin in the House, 1-vote margin or 0 margin really in the Senate. Obviously, Kamala Harris is the 1-vote tiebreak. It's difficult. We see what's going on with Joe Manchin. I don't need to go through all that. We know what it is, but there's got to be a sense of urgency because it would appear as if the Republicans are rigging the deck so the Democrats will be out of power in at least the House in a year. So you know you have a year to do something. Benny
and
Thompson,
you got 25.
Right.
You got 25 Congress,
right.
Democratic Congress people retiring.
Right, absolutely. But most of them are in blue districts that are probably going to be okay. I mean, I know there's G.K. Butterfield. There's a few, even questions, but a lot of them are blue districts. Brenda Lawrence is a blue district, for example. I get it. But more importantly, the Republicans are rigging the game. They're rigging the system, bringing the districts so that they're just going to win. So, we know sitting here right now, we got a year. Benny Thompson knows he's got a year. He's moving quickly. But they got to wake up. And again, another hour, we'll see the president. We'll see the attorney general. But they got to wake up. There is no sense of urgency here, given what we're talking about. We're openly talking about kidnapping governors and attacks on the Capitol. Are you kidding me? Now, I've worked in the U.S. Capitol. I worked on Capitol as a federal employee. So everything was very familiar to me in terms of territory and terrain with regard to what I watched last year. But you don't have to work there or know anybody to understand. We are at a huge point in history right now, and people need to wake up who are in power.
Yeah, and again, and we'll get James Wright and Andria Carter back in the conversation. But again, Attorney Tarver, Claudette Perry, the NNPA's executive administrator, is asking a very similar question. Why weren't they charged with treason rather than lesser charges? I mean, that's the very definition of treason, what they did, right?
Heck, you didn't even have to charge them with treason. They could have charged them with riot, as they've charged other people in Washington, D.C. when they've gone to the Capitol, which carries with it 5 years. I would have been satisfied with seeing some of these people getting a 5-year federal term. 3 federal judges have said that the Justice Department has treated the prosecution of these individuals that stormed the Capitol in a very, very weak and cavalier way. Heck, they got their own wing over at the detention center. Who else has that and is being monitored for how they're being treated? This thing went south from the very beginning. And do you ever hear from Christopher Wray? Where is he? Where is the head of the FBI? The problem is that no one took this thing seriously enough to be able to say that there is a message that needed to be sent to these people. And if you had done that from the very beginning, I would suggest to you that things might be very different even today in the way that people are approaching this.
Well, and then talking about sending a message, Andrea and James, remember Riley June Williams, the one that stole Nancy Pelosi's laptop. Remember the guy that put his foot up on her desk? That was a statement from them. So what the panel is saying is, where's the statement from the government?
Right. I think that people are scared to speak out. I think, where we said fear is the underlying issue, I think it's fear from everybody, those who were involved, those who are in leadership. Donald Trump doesn't fear anything. He's just being Donald Trump. Where is the counter version who's going to stand up and speak the truth. Now, there are some who are doing it, but their voice is not getting across. We need someone to step up and say, enough. You got to stop this. And I mean, I listened to Merrick Garland's speech yesterday, where he did imply that all perpetrators of January 6th were going to be prosecuted. But again, he's the guy who took down the Oklahoma bomber. He's the guy who took down other top investigations, but he was very methodical. Garrick Marlin's very methodical. He takes his time. He gets the evidence, then he prosecutes. He stings that way. Unfortunately, we don't have that time. We need someone to not sting like a bee, but sting like a rabbit who's racing down the track faster than the turtle, I should say. But we don't have that, and everyone's not picking up on it. Though the Democrats have a sense of urgency trying to get people to realize this. But the Republicans are like, hey, we got this. Don't worry about it. But, when you are overconfident that way and you've stacked the deck that way, you're still not counting on what is the voter going to do when they get in their ballot box next year. What are they going to say? Because, very slowly that erosion is happening to the Republican Party. They have lost a number of members in reaction to Donald Trump. I mean, it's amazing to see who has left the party as, quote, an independent. They didn't become a Democrat, but they're being very quiet. That silent majority is what I'm questioning for what the outcome of the midterm election is going to be and what the outcome of the 2024 election is going to be. What are they thinking? What are they saying? And the more they remain silent, the more that question gets bigger and bigger. And I think that's what we need to pinpoint and take a look at.
Okay, so I'm going to start with James Wright, but I want to go around the table here with this question. As Lauren Burke mentioned earlier, the president is going to address the nation this morning on the insurrection. What would you like to hear from the president? What should the president's message be today? And we'll go with James Wright and then James Washington, and we'll go to the lawyers, and Lauren Burke, you can close us out.
Let me be blunt, Stacey Brown, what I'd like President Biden to say. I'd like President Biden to say that those who were involved in this insurrection will be prosecuted. I would like for the president to say it would be done expeditiously. I would like the president to say that this will not happen again.
James Washington?
I would like a candid statement about what is happening now. What is at stake? I would like a very frank statement, if you will, that talks the way we talk on this show about what's at stake. All right. And that becomes the mantra of the Democratic Party. I know you don't have a lot of time. I just say, I'm in Georgia, you guys. I'm looking at what's happening based on what we're talking about, in the sense that Senator Warnock has to run again because he's dealing with the term. And this is what is going on now at the legislature in terms of what they're doing, if you will. And oh my God, Stacey Abrams is going to run again. So it's playing out right here. I know I went off script. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. Well, I'd like to hear President Biden say, oh my God, Stacey Abrams is going to run again. That's for sure. Robin Massengale, I want to go to you next with that same question.
I would like to hear the president talk about authoritarianism. I would like the president to talk about and scream from the top of his lungs, not in that we don't need a soft voice president for this moment. We are on a slow march to authoritarianism, and people who believe that they have the rights that they have today will not have them in the next year. It doesn't come with guns, tanks, and bombs. Democracy dies in daylight, and it dies because the people are not clear about the urgency of the moment. So I would like him to speak about history, that America is not unique in the loss of its freedoms. Germany has done this slow march before. We're not unique. And I would like him to ring that bell.
Yeah. Attorney Tarver?
Yeah, I'm not so much interested in what he says. I would like the president to act, and I'd like for him to get his party together. I'd like for him to talk about messaging to his party and media. They don't message at all, and if you don't control the message, you control absolutely nothing. We hear everything from the right. We hear absolutely nothing from the Democrats in terms of a real strategy of combating this and trying to change minds and hearts. That's what I'd like to see.
And Lauren, you started this fire.
Well, Attorney Tarver, being a smart defense attorney, stole most of my thunder there. It's exactly right. Shout out for being a defense attorney, by the way. We need more defense attorneys at DOJ. We need more Churchill and a lot less Neville Chamberlain from the President of the United States. And I'm reading, thanks to John Bresnahan, a friend of mine on Capitol Hill, from Punch Bowl. We've got the president here saying, are we going to be a nation at this moment? We've got to decide what type of nation we're going to be. Are we going to be a nation where we will allow partisan election officials to overturn legally expressed will of the people? Yeah, okay. We know that. We're talking about the problem. We know what the problem is, Joe Biden. We've known what the problem was 4 years ago. I mean, we knew what the problem was back in 2017. We saw Charlottesville. We don't need a restatement of the problem. We need to hear a plan of action. We go back, we see how fascist regimes start. And Joe Biden is old enough to know and smart enough to know exactly what I'm talking about when I say Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill came in and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to stop these people. He's not talking about how bad the people are. We are going to act and we are going to stop these people. And we are going to fight in every quadrant of our country to stop these people. And Joe Biden has got to wake up. Joe Biden has been around forever. When I was an intern on the Hill, Joe Biden, I passed him in the hallway in my 20s. He knows what this is. So I'm not sure what the fear is. He controls the entire government, as does his political party. There is no excuse to be this tepid. And I know I'm not reading the entire speech. Maybe it comes around later. But I am not hearing anything from the people who are in the top elected leadership now that makes me think that they're awake enough to meet this moment.
Well, and along that line, and you again kind of stole my thunder a little bit, Lauren, as you often do, because you're so insightful. Real quick for everyone, we still have a couple of minutes. So at this moment, who would be the president to lead America? At this moment, if you had to choose from history, who would be that president? James Washington.
Ooh, that's I'm not sure I want to be the first person to answer that question. And there's a reason. And while I'm talking, I'm thinking, but I'm not really going to answer, because if I look back over time, and I would go, boy, we really need a wartime president.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I can't say I was there when everybody was at war, but we need a real wartime president, because those are the tactics and the strategies that are being used against democracy. So we need somebody who could defend it. I know he's a Republican, but am I talking about Eisenhower? I'm not sure, I really am not sure. Am I talking about Kennedy? I'm not sure, but I have to go back that far. The question of who would I like to see as president today is a different question. And that's one that we need to be thinking about, because, I'm not so sure that Joe Biden needs to be running for a second term.
Yeah.
I think it should be Lyndon Johnson, because of his style. Mm-hmm. He was in your face, right, not taking any crap. And that's what you need right now on the Hill. That's what you need in the Senate. Basically, you need Joe Biden to become like Mitch McConnell. I hate to say it. I really do.
But
he's right across the river from me because he's in Kentucky. But I'm just saying, in terms of style, attitude, confidence, we need someone to walk in and be like, okay, we're doing this. We're doing this. We're doing this. We're doing this. Because unfortunately, I think everyone said, we don't need tepid. We need strength, but we need force. And we're not seeing force.
Andrea, I concur
with Lyndon Johnson.
Well, I think Andrea dropped the mic with the Mitch McConnell, simply because James Wright is a historian. He's a presidential historian, right? But simply because, as she walked us through that, and I don't think Lauren would disagree, when Mitch McConnell has wanted something done, it has gotten done, right, James?
You're absolutely right. And to answer your question, my pick would be Harry Truman. Harry Truman was president during a very difficult time. After World War II, Black people were saying, I'm not taking it anymore. And so he kind of balanced things out. Harry Truman, we really need you, Harry, right now.
Well, I'll let you guys, the ones that didn't get the chance to choose, go ahead and choose.
I would say Lyndon Johnson, because the thing about Lyndon Johnson is he was able to get his legislators together. He was able to make the party leaders do what he wanted them to do. That's how we got to the Civil Rights Act, because everybody wasn't all on the same page with that. And Lyndon Johnson was able to force some things to happen by sheer will of his political personality. So, that's between him and FDR, who was willing to be courageous enough to look at social change. That's my choice.
And Robin?
I will concur with all that has been said.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Well, I know Lauren has started this with Winston Churchill, her comments on Winston Churchill, but I'm gonna go back to you, Lauren, and then we'll let Dr. Chavis close us out.
Yeah, I think Ms. Carter hit it out of the park with Lyndon Johnson. Obviously, that leadership style is what's required for this moment. Joe Biden talks way too much about wanting to have consensus and I want to get the Republicans on board. This is not the time for that. Now, maybe that was fine in the 1990s. This is not the 1990s. He's got to wake up. This is what happens when you have people in Congress, by the way, a little bit too long, because he's thinking about an era that has passed. Yeah. And Lyndon Johnson did things, of course, like obviously voted. He passed the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. Nobody expected him to do that. You think those good old boys wanted to do that? They didn't want to do that. He had to force them. He had to threaten them. He had to get in their face. He had to say, this is what we're doing. This is the plan. This is happening. Get on board or I'm coming at you. That is the leadership style that is required for the moment that we're in. And how Joe Biden doesn't recognize that, it's a shame, because personality has so much to do with leadership style, as we all know. And he's just not, at this point, meeting the moment.
And I'm glad you said that too, Lauren. Dr. Chavis, Lauren, obviously you heard, they got voting rights and they got civil rights passed in an era, as you well know, where you have white folks like today, worse than today, the white supremacists. And yet we are saying today that we can't get it done because of Joe Manchin in West Virginia.
Right.
I'm waiting for Doc's response.
Well, again, I think a moment of silence is necessary. That's why I didn't just quickly respond. For the last hour, and we want to thank the Black press of America. We've talked about the complexities of today, the complexities of yesterday, and the complexities of today. Our job in the media, and I want to note as we close this out, Stacey, that this year, 2022, marks the 195th year of the Black press of America. I went back over the last 195 years just to survey the front pages of our Black newspapers. Everything we've discussed over the last hour has been discussed before. I believe that another part of the complexity we have not discussed, I think Attorney Tarver hinted at it, and so did Lauren, is that the role of the media. We haven't mentioned Fox News. There are institutionalists on both sides of this question. And I think the role of the media, not just Facebook, but I'm talking about broadcast television, broadcast radio, and right-wing newspapers. There's a contest, and there's a war. The reason why I'm optimistic is that if we deal with what we have today, we do have a president today. His name is Joe Biden. We do have a vice president today. Her name is Kamala Harris, who incidentally was a former prosecutor, a former state attorney general. I know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris know what needs to be done. I don't think they're asleep. I think they're wrestling with a party and a nation. And we have not mentioned the demographic changes in America. Demographically, in 2022, America is different than in the 1960s, when the Voting Rights Act was passed, when the Civil Rights Bill was passed, when the Fair Housing Act was passed. So I think all of these things, I think we need a complex solution to a complex problem. And I think the role of the Black press is to continue to have this discussion. Stacey, I want to thank you. I think this has been an hour show worth participating in, worth listening to. And now the question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Yes, we have to encourage the president and the vice president to do what they're elected to do, the attorney general to do what he's been appointed to do and confirmed to do. But also, I think there's a question on us. What are we to do? You know, if we look back in the past, I would like for Frederick Douglass to have been president, you know, or Shirley Chisholm to have been president. You know, we've had these questions before us before. And I think that it has to be a sense of self-determination, a call to arms. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not asking everybody to go out and buy guns. I'm talking about other kind of arms. You know, in the 23rd Psalm, it says, "Thy rod and thy staff, they'll comfort me." Where's our rod? Where's our staff? You know, what are we doing? We have to bring the faith into this. We got to bring the Black church where we assemble. The Black church cannot be quiet in this hour. The Black press cannot be quiet at this hour. Our activists cannot be quiet at this hour. I think Benny Thompson is a freedom fighter. He's leading this select committee. Look at what the Watergate committee was able to do versus what the select committee is able to do. Remember, we have a select committee because the Congress refused to establish a legislative committee, even to deal with the attack on the Capitol. So I'll come at this a little bit more optimistic. I think the forces of history, the forces of today, and the forces of the future, something that Tarver Law said to the Black press when he talked to us a couple of years ago. It's our responsibility not to predict the future, but to shape it, to make what will happen today, to make what will happen tomorrow. I thank God for the 195 years of the Black press of America.
And the Black Press of America, the NNPA, will be in Florida starting on the 19th for our midwinter conference. Join us at the Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, where the theme is the publishing industry, advancing the Black press of America, reaffirming, engaging, and empowering. And we're going to have a very, very special guest during the conference, a live performance at the Diplomat by none other than Stephanie Mills. So join us. Visit NNPA/events.com or -events.com to register and get a hotel room and join us there. We'll be practicing all safety protocols. Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Let It Be Known. We'll see you tomorrow.